Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. They've been heavily rumoured for years. They're conspicuous because they are two of the only Wii U Switch titles still to receive a Switch transfer. Sooner or later, re-releases of these games have to be coming. The question is, how? We're going to look at 5 options open to Nintendo, including some rather surprising ones, and see if we can identify which are most likely. Let's start with the one fans have been speculating about for a long time. The classic double pack option. As these games are already ports of remasters, it does make sense to bundle these together, but there's one key reason why I don't expect they will, and it's not the reason you think. Sure, we all know that Nintendo is loath to sell its games short, and putting an effective $30 price tag on 2 of its Jewel of the Crown titles doesn't exactly fit the big N's MO. Even in these days where a near remake quality remaster of Metroid Prime can drop for a cool $40, that seems like a stretch. The only recent precedents for a double pack are Bayonetta 1 and 2, far more niche games, and the Super Mario 3D All-Stars pack, which was a limited edition feature. But that's not the key issue. Just take a look at Wind Waker and Twilight Princess as games. They have completely different tones, completely different aesthetics, and, crucially in the US market especially, completely different age ratings. Wind Waker has an ESRB rating of everyone and a PEGI rating of 7. Twilight Princess, though, is ESRB Teen and PEGI 12. Now, I completely appreciate that most adult gamers don't pay a blind bit of notice to these ratings, but I think Nintendo may well do. Not least since Wind Waker is perfectly positioned to be an entry-level Zelda game to younger players, something it absolutely cannot do if parents won't pick it up because it's branded as for teens. I can't rule out a double pack entirely, but I'm going to rate this option as very low. The second option available to Nintendo is 2 separate releases. But even Nintendo have balked at simple facsimiles of Wii U games on Switch. In a world where full, fat, highly acclaimed Metroid Prime Remaster retails at $40, could Wind Waker really go for $60? It absolutely could, because it is, after all, Zelda. But my hunch is that there will be at least some kind of addition to lift it beyond a simple cut and paste job. The most obvious opportunity afforded by the advent of the new console would be a 4K treatment. Here's where Wind Waker is at a distinct advantage. The cel shading style would translate brilliantly to a new console without requiring much more than basic upscaling. But Twilight Princess, even in its HD form, looks graphically dated and would require a lot more work. Tantalus employees have been interviewed since about how they really wanted the opportunity to do a deeper graphical remaster, but they were spec'd by Nintendo to focus mainly on textures. Has enough changed now that Nintendo want to spend the time and money required to really make this game shine on 4K? Or could it be that Wind Waker will be given the 4K treatment, while Twilight Princess remains on the Switch? In this case, not a 2-pack release, but an old-fashioned simultaneous release. One for the main new system, Wind Waker, one for what has become the handheld version of the console, Twilight Princess, playing on the old-fashioned Switch. This would be very similar to the days when the Wii would get Skyward Sword and the 3DS would get Ocarina of Time 3D, or the N64 would get Ocarina of Time, and the Game Boy Color would enjoy Oracles of Ages and Oracles of Seasons. Different Zelda games for different consoles. In this case, Wind Waker and Twilight Princess could release alongside, but the Switch would be the low-powered secondary console, the old handheld spot, although still hopefully playable on the new system, and Wind Waker would be on the more powerful system. I'm not sure that Nintendo would want to acknowledge any disparity between the two games' reach in this way, but it would be one way to have dual releases without a double pack. Still, a simple graphical update isn't usually Nintendo's style. From a new funky mode to a whole bolted-on side game, Nintendo likes to find some way to boost these titles, just enough to hopefully entice some people to double dip. I think that will be the case here. Now, the simplest way to do this is just to change the resolution. If the games don't release until a new console is out, then they absolutely have the latitude to upgrade these games to 4K and be done with it. However, this is a much more expensive project than just porting. In the case of Wind Waker, the nature of its textures are such that it could probably survive AI upscaling quite effectively, and those big blocks of cel-shaded style colours would look even crisper and more magnificent. But Twilight Princess, that's going to need some work. Of course, Wind Waker is the less recent of the 2 titles, and so if just one game were going to be released, don't be shocked if Toon Link's debut gets the nod. But I think a more interesting option is the Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury option, a game tacked on to an existing title. And maybe they don't need to develop anything from scratch because options for these minigames already exist. Well, sort of. In the Four Swords Adventures Japanese edition, there was a Wind Waker spin-off minigame called Navi Trackers. This is a small scavenger hunt game that stars Tetra and multicoloured links, and features a gorgeous introductory scene in the Wind Waker engine. Granted, most of the actual games themselves are rendered in 2D, but it seems like it would be possible to take this idea over and adapt it into the Wind Waker engine to create a new side mode that would encourage multiplayer. Something that Nintendo is always keen to promote, especially if there's an online component that could push people toward taking up Nintendo Switch Online. There would even be a mild buzz around this in international markets because it's never been released outside Japan, and even in Japan, Four Swords Adventures is pretty obscure, and so there's a chance to take an old game and zhuzh it up for a new audience. Speaking of audiences, if you're enjoying this content, please give us a like to signal boost the channel. For Twilight Princess, there's an even more natural candidate. You know it, it's Link's Crossbow Training, a part sequel, part tech demo, imagineered by Miyamoto for the Wii, but using the Twilight Princess engine. Granted, this is a pretty limited experience and isn't a traditional Zelda game by any means. I don't imagine that either of these titles will have fans leaping out of their seats in joy, but they would be one way to add a frisson of extra interest to titles that have been released multiple times. Going much more ambitious, another game to paste on that would be awesome would be Phantom Hourglass. Wind Waker's less well-known sequel would be a brilliant candidate for a remake in the Wind Waker HD engine, and I'm sure Grezzo would do a fantastic job of reviving it. But I don't see Nintendo ever doing a full-on remake as just a side mode. What about then a true Bowser's Fury, an experimental minigame? Bowser's Fury really did have a clear goal. It was a proof of concept of a pure open-world Mario title. Is there something with either Wind Waker or Twilight Princess that they could experiment with? It's certainly true that, after more than a decade in the Breath of the Wild timeline, the Zelda team are now likely to be stepping into new territory, and a way to monetize any experimental projects they undertake may be welcome to them. However, generally, Nintendo are pretty secretive and don't publish any examples of their experimental titles until they're absolutely ready, and I wouldn't bank on them doing so here. Sadly, I think the chance of an add-on game is low, but some kind of add-on mode or visual upgrade to each does seem plausible, and I'll put it at a medium chance that one or other of these games comes out before the end of 2025 with some kind of enhancement. There is another possibility, though, that is rather sad but worth mentioning, and that's they just don't release. After all, Nintendo Switch Online will eventually move to doing GameCube games. I don't think that is imminent, as they still have a huge backlog of Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Mega Drive, and even many N64 titles still to release. But they will want flagship games for the online system, and in a world where potentially many of the big titles have recent remakes, they may decide that regular old Wind Waker will fill that slot just fine. There's a precedent for this. They had perfectly good versions of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask from the 3DS titles that they could have modestly upscaled and put into a Zelda Anniversary double pack, and yet they chose to give these games their Switch debuts as original flavour N64 ports. I really hope this doesn't happen personally, as I really like my games to have modern quality of life improvements, but I can't deny that this is a realistic possibility. It comes down to the simple question of whether Wind Waker and Twilight Princess would make them more money as standalone releases, or as incentives to enter a potential even higher third tier of Nintendo Switch Online. And if not those games, which? Mario Sunshine is a divisive title to rely on. They may be able to rest on Mario Kart Double Dash and Super Smash Bros. Brawl, but Zelda is an iconic franchise for them, and it's very unusual to see a new system released without any kind of Zelda representation at all. Ultimately, I think there's more scope for Nintendo to issue re-releases of Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD than not, but I'm also aware that this could be a good dollop of hope over experience. However, I think it's unlikely that GameCube will launch next year or even the year after. Possibly not even in 2025, and if we get into 2026, another possibility emerges: the 40th anniversary, and a 40th anniversary box set. I know, I said double packs were unlikely, but the 40th anniversary is an opportunity for something different, and they wouldn't have to release the games in one pack. 2 separate $40 cartridges or one $100 collector's set with various extra fluff would probably be a useful anniversary wheeze if they wanted to commemorate Zelda's 40th with Tetra, which, as any Tetris fan will know, derives from the Greek for four. I grant you this seems like a long way off, but there are other potential Zelda games that may well drop in the intervening years, and so it's not necessarily the case that Nintendo needs to rely on Wind Waker or Twilight Princess to bulk out their coming lineup. Okay though, forecasters, let's make your judgment. Do you see these games waking up or disappearing into the Twilight realm?